On this episode of Newt's World, how is artificial intelligence going to impact healthcare? Many experts have indicated AI may change the way we diagnose disease, manage medical records, and review medical data. High-powered artificial intelligence and machine learning are enabling scientists and doctors to create and analyze vast amounts of data and to develop new molecular entities to disrupt targeted diseases. My guest today believes we are on the cusp of really significant medical breakthroughs. I'm really pleased to welcome my guest, Dr. Marschall Runge. He is the former Executive Dean of the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, is currently Executive Vice President for Medical Affairs and Dean of the Medical School for the University of Michigan, and his most recent book is a techno-medical thriller entitled Coded to Kill. Marschall, thank you for joining me. I think this is very cool.
It's a privilege to be on your show. Thank you very much.
Was it a big shock moving from UNC to Michigan?
Well, I had to change sports. At UNC, all basketball, no football. Here it's mainly all football, no basketball, although there have been some good teams.
Although Michigan at times has had very good men's basketball teams. I was just curious. I thought that'd be almost a culture shock. Now, in a piece you published in Real Clear Health, entitled, We're on the Cusp of a Historic Epoch of Discovery, you describe the medical breakthroughs that we're experiencing right now. Will you discuss some of them?
Sure. The AI movement's been termed a Promethean moment, meaning, everything's going to change about everything. And I tend to be more or less a believer of that. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One has to do, you mentioned with drug discovery. And in the past, if you had a great target that looked like it was going to cure or significantly positively impact a disease, you'd get 100 medicinal chemists working on creating a molecule. And that process itself, much less testing, would take years. Now, and I'm familiar with a drug discovery project, which was done using AI, taking a big database of drugs, training the AI algorithm, and over about 3 days, it identified about 5 molecules to treat a disease that was virtually untargetable today. And all 5 of these turned out to have potency, and a couple of them were compounds unknown compounds. So it's almost like thinking back to natural products where you dig something up out of the soil and you find a new antibiotic. So it finds things that I find incomprehensible how it brings all that data together, but it really does. And so if you think drug discovery, I think that's awfully important because when we think about healthcare, we have so many diseases that are difficult to treat. Some are rare diseases, rare genetic diseases. I mean, one of the biggest problems is type 2 diabetes or Alzheimer's. And these are very difficult to treat diseases that I think diabetes has gotten better, but I think we'll have solutions for in the coming few years.
When you say few years, are we talking a decade, 2 decades? I mean, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking less than that, less than 5 years, maybe as soon as 2 or 3 years, because another approach to drug discovery, which can be aided tremendously by AI, is using RNA therapies, inhibitory RNA therapies, and they also can be developed very quickly in a very targeted way.
Does this kind of stress our regulatory system?
For sure, in a lot of different ways. So as you, I'm sure, know much more than I do about it, some of these new therapies are enormously expensive. So how can we afford them? And that's where I'd like to flip over to thinking about AI in healthcare. We have so far to go in terms of reducing the cost of healthcare, and we desperately need to do that. So there are currently some small companies out there that enable the use of an AI bot. It won't replace a doctor or a nurse, but is available 24/7 that can get far along in diagnosis. And then if you take that along with some new technologies, there was I thought, a fascinating paper in the Washington Post about Alzheimer's disease, where 5 different groups described 5 different ways of early diagnosis of Alzheimer's, recognizing patterns that as people, as humans, the most brilliant humans can't recognize these patterns because they bring together so much data. So I think if you combine some of that, which leads to earlier treatment for chronic diseases, the payback won't be overnight, but the payback for the healthcare system in the United States could be over a decade. We could really see a dramatic reduction in what I'll call unnecessary testing. Maybe it's necessary today, but it won't be necessary in a couple of years.
Yeah, I had the experience. I went in to get my teeth cleaned last week, and the dentist now has an artificial intelligence component that when they look at the x-rays, the artificial intelligence component scans the same data and can identify at about 10 times the accuracy what the dentist can identify. It's a local dentist, not some advanced research center. He said it's just a technology that's come online and that it dramatically enhances his ability to catch, for example, very, very early if you have a cavity. You've got a couple of things you mentioned, and one of them is this whole question of really advanced imaging techniques that I think are going to revolutionize our ability to have early intervention, which sometimes increases cost, sometimes decreases, but it almost always extends life.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, if you think of any chronic disease, the earlier you intervene, the better the outcome. So I couldn't agree more. I'll tell you just a sort of a weird research study I read some time ago, recently really. I had to do with looking at the concept that the color of your tongue can predict disease. And this is like ancient Chinese medicine. But the group that was investigating it looked at using AI in that circumstance. And AI was fantastic. And that was a small group. We're not ready to get AI out of our tongues right now, but it proved the point that AI can pick up things we just don't see. But also, we don't always know what AI is looking at. So maybe it's not looking at the color at all. Maybe it's looking at the papules and the distribution of the papules of the tongue. I don't really know. And that's one of the great mysteries of AI. You don't know what all data it brought in, but it sure does turn out to be provocatively accurate.
How much research do you see going on both at UNC and at Michigan in the application of AI?
I don't follow things at UNC quite as closely as I was, but I can tell you we have an explosion of it. So we're looking at applications of AI, direct applications in healthcare. We're using AI to be able to organize and scan and make much quicker decisions about electronic medical records. I don't know if you've ever requested your own electronic medical record, but it's like page after page after page after page. And AI does a fantastic job of just summarizing that and summarizing maybe 300 pages down to 2 or 3 pages. And for your care provider, then the main thing I think that helps is they don't miss stuff. I know when I start looking through a medical record, and after a while, I'm just nodding off. So it makes it more accurate and much easier for the providers. The same thing in terms of thinking about how we interact with what we call the inbox in Epic, where people ask a lot of questions. AI, we can't be sure that it's going to answer every one of those, but if you get like an excellent first draft, and so it really speeds things up in getting back to patients in real time. So I think those are great, but more importantly, we're looking at applications of AI in areas that do involve imaging. So like eye exams, ophthalmology, in interpreting mammograms and interpreting MRIs and CTs. When a radiologist looks at an MRI, you may have seen them doing this in real time, but they're looking at 30 or 40 images. And one thing AI can certainly do is say, images 1 through 32, don't worry about it, they're normal. Image 32, 3, and 34, you better take a quick look at. And then the radiologist has much more time to ponder it and try to put that together with the clinical scenario. But I think the next step is going to be AI looking at the medical record and AI looking at the images and pulling it all together. And I think that's just around the corner.
One of the problems is political. We were looking at a little company that had developed a computerized eye exam. The normal model is you go see your optometrist or ophthalmologist every 2 years in order to have an exam so they can reorder whatever you might need. And then you go back the alternating year just to have a quick checkup. Well, they had developed a computerized scan that would perform the second year. And in state after state, the ophthalmology and optometry lobbyists would get it outlawed.
I can't believe it.
Because they saw it as a direct threat to their income. One of the great lessons for me when I stepped down as speaker, I took 2 areas, national security and healthcare. which are both very complicated. Healthcare, I think, is about 10 times more complicated than national security. It's unbelievably dense. But one of the things I learned that was, I think, a real surprise to me was the degree to which the systems operate in an entirely human manner. That is, if you're a hospital, your interest is optimizing the hospital. And if you're the local pharmacy, your interest is optimizing the pharmacy. And in the process, if that means that you're sub-optimizing the country, that's okay for you because, your pharmacy is doing well. So it made me realize how you both had to figure out an improvement, but then you had to figure out how to get through all these minefields to get the improvement both culturally adopted, would professionals be willing to do it, and to get it adopted by people who might feel that their income or their prestige or their status was threatened. I don't know how much of that you experience in a medical school, but it's been a fascinating challenge to me.
That's so interesting because it's absolutely true. And I'm currently working on a book with Forbes. Forbes will ask CEOs in different areas to write books. And so ours is about changes in healthcare, really disruptors in healthcare. And so all these disruptors are companies like what you talked about that are coming in and saying, hey, there's a problem. There's a pain point in medicine. We can fix it. And they do. But then everyone's competing with everybody for that same dollar. And it's true. You think about hospitals, you think about insurance companies, you think about pharmacy benefit managers. They're all after that same dollar. And they're pretty successful, which I think does lead to an awful lot of cost in healthcare. So I can't tell you how happy I'm to hear that somebody who is integrally involved in decision-making at the national level understands this. It's a pleasant surprise to me.
To go back to artificial intelligence, to what extent is the University of Michigan Hospital using this and trying to integrate it into either accelerating speed or maximizing the ability to deal with complexity?
We're currently, I would say a year ago, we were using no AI. I'd say we're using AI in 10% of what we do now. I believe that in the next year or two, we'll be using it in half of what we do because people are a little anxious about it to start with, but I think it's proven that it has real value and is not just a spectacle. It offers real value.
Is the early diagnostics or the ability to radically enhance research or to create connectivity for the patients? I've always thought, if you think about the number of times in your life you'll go into a doctor or a dentist or something and sit down and fill out paper. And I'm now old enough when they say, list all of your drugs. Well, I carry all of my drugs in my phone, so I can pull up my phone and do it. But I think back to my mother, who did not have a phone at that time that was smart. She had a regular phone. And she was taking enough drugs. I am certain there are occasions where she went to see a doctor or a hospital and only gave them half the drugs she was using because she just forgot. Shouldn't there be some way to almost automate that whole process?
I think there is. And I think particularly now that we have electronic medical records that can connect to pharmacy records, we do already look at pharmacy records. When somebody says, yes, I haven't missed my dose of Lipitor in 3 years, you see they also haven't refilled their prescription in the last 2 years. So something doesn't quite connect there. I think as we get more and more connected, now I do think that there's a danger of getting connected. I'll come back to that in just a minute. But it's long been a dogma that, wow, if we could just pick medications or surgical procedures or whatever therapies that were targeted toward the individual rather than saying, well, we know this approach works in 60% of people. And many people take hypertension as an easy example. They may try 2 or 3 or 4 drugs before they find one that works. I think by combining, when it's going to be possible to combine genotype and other omics, so to speak, the proteomics and others, along with medical history, to be much more accurate in predicting the kind of therapies that will be really useful. So that's where I see us going. And that saves time. It's more effective. And it saves money in the long run. When I said I think there's a worry about all this connectivity, that's actually one of the streams of my novel, because once you're totally connected, you're totally connected. And all it takes is one kind of rogue 20-year-old at Amazon to know that, gee, if I put together Marshall's purchasing, his medications, his EHR, what can I do with that? And in my novel, it's what evil can I do with it?
Given your prestige and your background in health, what led you to write a novel?
Well, a couple of things. So I started because I had a patient. I'm a cardiologist. I had a patient who came in, and he could have been a perfect character in a Grisham novel. An attorney, worked for the FBI, got on drugs, lost his family, and was kind of working his way back. And he had heart problems. So one day he said, "Hey, you know John Grisham?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think I do." And he said, "He's an author." And I said, "Oh." He said, "I'll bring you a book." So I read a Grisham book, and I was forever hooked on Grisham. I love the guy. I love these thrillers. And I thought, well, it'd be fun to try to write one. I bet I can do that. Of course, that was like 15 years before I finished my novel. But at the end of the day, what I wanted to combine two things. One was to make a thriller that people would like to read, and the other was to hit an audience that isn't reading editorials in the Washington Post or the New York Times about some of the things they have to think about. How do they protect their PHI, their protected health information? How do they keep things out of the medical record they don't want in the medical record? This is not a real, what do they call that? Not a teaser, but there is a character in the novel that is a Southern politician that somebody wants to kill, and they figured out how they could kill him through the medical record. I found this fascinating. I didn't know this, but in big hospitals, when you see that IV bag hanging, you think, well, there's a farm tech or a pharmacist down there who mixed it up. Well, the big hospitals, that's not the case. They use robots, and the robots are incredibly accurate. But you can imagine a scenario where somebody hacks in the medical record, reprograms the robot, and gives me something that is lethal to me. So that's kind of one of the themes that's swirling around in the novel.
Did you find it challenging to learn how to do dialogue? And because a novel is really different than writing nonfiction.
Yeah, I found it very challenging. What helped me the most was, for several years, I get up early, so I do a little write in the morning, and inevitably somebody would aggravate me. So I'd come home and write something really nasty about that person. So after about 5 years, I was so proud of my novel, I showed it to my wife, and she said, "Well, let's see now, there are about 100 characters. There's no dialogue and no plot. Maybe you ought to go off to a writing course." So I did do that. I don't know if you do creative writing or not. It's fun to do because unlike everything that you and I have to do in our lives, there's no background check. It's just you make it up. So it's fiction.
Where was your writing course?
I went to a course that was put on by a company. It's not run anymore, called Seek, S-E-A-K. It was on Cape Cod, and it was hosted by two really great doctor authors, Michael Palmer and Tess Gerritsen, both write thrillers. I went to it thinking, well, they're going to make a brief appearance, but they were there for 3 days. And I also went there thinking, wow, I'm going to get into this year. This was back in 2007 or 8, because how many doctor writers can there be? And so I was lucky. I got in. They said, well, you're lucky you filled it up. There are 350 doctors coming, including 2 classmates of mine from medical school. So a lot of interest in this field.
And are most of them writing fiction, or they just want to learn how to write?
Most of them are writing fiction. And it ranges from some of the most bizarre stuff you can imagine to people trying to write things like I was writing.
I've written both fiction and nonfiction, and they're totally different challenges.
Tell me what you wrote about in fiction, because I love reading fiction.
I started with a very good friend of mine named Bill Fortune, who is a history professor, but also a professional novelist, and has written many, many novels. Our first book was an alternative history in which Hitler is in a car accident just before Pearl Harbor, and so Germany doesn't attack us. And the result is we don't have an excuse to declare war. So we turn to the Pacific, and Hitler dominates in Europe. And the novel's called 1945. And so in this alternative 1945, the Germans are dominant in Europe, we're dominant in the Pacific, and Hitler has decided he has to attack us. And he has been briefed that there's a facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, developing a nuclear weapon.
You've got some fact in there.
Yeah, and so the whole thing is an adventure story, launching a specialized raid to try to destroy this before the Americans can build it. And I learned so much from Bill because, for example, I would talk with you and say the Germans had arrived just off South Carolina, and the troops that were going to go to Tennessee had to move from a large ocean-going ship to a small ship that was going to take them upriver. Well, by the time Bill taught me how you write the last guy trying to get off the ship and the ship waving back and forth and the danger of being crushed. And in the end, he does get crushed. I mean, he took a couple sentences and turned them into 5 pages where you're sitting on the edge of your seat thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen next? We went on from there and wrote several books about the Revolutionary War from Washington's perspective. And then we wrote a couple of novels about the Civil War. And probably our best gambit, we wrote an alternative history of Gettysburg, and we got the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We got their commanding general and the person who teaches their Gettysburg class. And we went out and we walked them through our theory, because we were both military historians. So we had a theory of how this thing might have happened. And we went out and literally walked the battlefield. And when we got done, the guy who taught the course said, that actually sounds more like Lee than what he did that day. And so we wrote an alternative history of Gettysburg, which then led to 2 more alternative histories of how the Civil War would have occurred in that setting.
What's that one called?
The first one's called Gettysburg.
Oh, I've seen that book. I've never read it, though.
We did it deliberately because Gettysburg is the most frequently written about event in American history. We were trying to find some way to launch our fiction efforts, but it was great fun. So when we describe things in the book, that is how they were. You could go and take our book and you could walk the whole battlefield and get a sense for it. But it was really fun, and it was fun to take personalities like Lee or Meade or Longstreet and weave them in a way that worked well. Now, I will tell you, I recently did a podcast with one of the great American historians, and his father had written a book called Killer Angels, which is the best book about Gettysburg ever written. It's like poetry. I've written far more nonfiction than fiction. When you find somebody who has the rhythm and they have the words and they suck you into their world, I find it amazing.
I love it. I'll tell you what, I didn't know this about you, but I'm going to get 1945 and Gettysburg and read them.
When you're looking down the road the next 4 or 5 years, do you think you're going to be able to collaborate with the insurance companies and get them to help accept and help implement the kind of changes that are coming with AI?
Well, not knowing who in the world might listen to this, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I think. And that is, we have tried very hard to collaborate with insurance companies. It's been difficult to collaborate because in so many ways we're at odds financially. And so we haven't tried around AI. I'll tell you one good experience. We had a good experience with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan around developing quality initiatives. And this was looking at the quality of different kinds of operations across the state. If you have your prostate taken out or if you have any kind of cancer surgery. And I think that actually was very productive. We combined our data with their data, their claims data, and it helped identify people that needed to improve their performance. And it was done in a, very protected environment. But I think that was good for healthcare. Subsequently, we tried to collaborate in other areas unsuccessfully. And so AI ought to be one that is a natural. But I'll tell you a funny story I heard about AI recently. So we have one consultant who's telling us that we can come deliver to you AI to help with pre-authorization for procedures. So whatever you're going to have, from an eye surgery to heart surgery, your insurance company has to pre-authorize that. And that can be a difficult process. And we sometimes end up with somebody who's on the gurney getting ready to have surgery and we still don't have pre-authorization. And if we don't get it, we eat the entire procedure in terms of the cost. So I thought, well, this could be really good. And then I was at another meeting of colleagues. They said, man, you got to be careful because the insurance companies now are using AI to figure out how to best deny pre-authorization. So, just a great example of AI works in one way for us, another way for the insurance companies. But I think if we can put aside that and think about how we could collaborate in terms of quality outcomes, and it's been talked about for decades to bend the cost curve in healthcare, we've got to do that. We're out of control right now. And that's hard for me to say because I've been in healthcare for 40 years now. I think AI in the ways we talked about it before in terms of better, more rapid, earlier diagnosis, better selection of therapies can make a big difference.
As we think about this much more electronic world, your book, Coded to Kill, really centers around the hacking of an electronic health record system. How much, as we put more and more things in an electronic format, how much do you worry, not just about the criminal hacker, but also the North Koreans or the Chinese? They're very sophisticated players, as the Israelis just showed in Lebanon. There are people who have capabilities that are a little scary.
How on earth could they do that? With the pagers, you mean?
Well, it was about a 12-year project.
Really?
Yeah. They ultimately got inside the supply chain and made sure that only their pagers got to Hezbollah. It's a very elegant, very difficult project. And it takes a country that's in desperate efforts to survive. But if you think about it, all these different kind of things, how do you build layers of defense so you can't be hacked into?
Right. Well, I'm happy to both tell you and hear you critique it, given your knowledge of national security is, pretty much what we're thinking about. So when I came here, one of the first questions I asked was, how often do we have people inappropriately accessing our medical records? When I was at UNC, I got into this because the dean at the time, we had a bunch of people, many staff, and about 40 faculty who had inappropriately accessed the electronic medical record of one of the fabulous basketball players who was out for a few games. And so, lucky me, I got assigned to talk to all those faculty about this and, how it's a federal crime and try to scare the dickens out of them. I got the wildest stories. One guy told me, well, I'm a sickle cell expert, so I worried he might have sickle cell disease. So I was looking to see if I could be helpful. That wasn't it. He's a sports fan. I got here and I said, does that ever happen at Michigan? They said, oh, no, we know it doesn't. And I said, well, what automated system are you using to look at every medical record? There are some out there. And they weren't using one. It took 2 or 3 years to get them to use one. It turned out we were having many, many people that were inappropriately accessing medical records. Now, that's not a hack at all. They just have access. They find out you're in the hospital or the governor's in the hospital. And they say, let me see what's going on. And so we fired a whole slew of people. It's taken about 5 years to get it under control. Now we're down to about 20 times a year that happens. But that's trivial. What I worry about is we get about between 6,000 and more attempted hacks a day externally. And most of those I think of as like those robocalls you get during dinner time. But there are about 80 a month that are serious attempts from foreign actors and sometimes domestic. And what's said in healthcare, which I believe is sadly true, is it's not if you will ever get hacked, it's when you'll get hacked and what you do. And so the layers we've tried to build in, we have lots of security on top to try to prevent the hacks. But some of the best things we're doing, and it's AI enabled actually, is to detect inappropriate access into our medical record and immediately cordon it off. So, the CrowdStrike thing that happened recently, we were back within hours, a couple of hours, where some health systems in Michigan were down for 2 or 3 weeks. You can't do anything when your EHR is blocked. And our university had a big hack about a year ago during student registration time. That wasn't the medical school, and that was the university. It's like a pimple. How do we surround it so it doesn't spread? That's our strategy. I'd love to hear what you think we ought to be doing.
The only advice I would have is to find one of the most recent National Security Agency heads and bring them in and ask them to review everything.
We have not done that. That's a great idea.
I'm very close to one of the former NSA heads. That's a world that is so sophisticated, and it's still the leading capacity in internet activity in the world. Marschall, I want to thank you for joining me. This has been a wide-ranging and I think pretty fascinating conversation. Your book, Coded to Kill, I suspect is the beginning of a whole new career.
I hope so.
It's available now on Amazon and bookstores everywhere, and I really appreciate you talking with us. I hope we can do this again when your next book comes out.
Well, thank you again. It was awesome.
Thank you to my guest, Dr. Marschall Runge. You can get a link to buy his book, Coded to Kill, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Pendley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review. so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.